My name is Adaline Voss. I was 26 when everything changed, standing in a small white room behind a church I had chosen for its arched windows, listening to a silence that had gone on 3 minutes too long. The dress had cost more than I earned in a month as a structural engineer, but it wasn't the money I thought about while I waited. It was the light. It came through the stained glass in pieces, blue, then gold, then blue again, and I remember thinking that if Marcus didn't come through that door in the next 60 seconds, I would remember this light for the rest of my life. I was right, though not in the way I imagined. My mother knocked twice, which was our signal. I opened the door already smiling, already rehearsing the joke I'd make about him getting lost in his own tie.
She didn't smile back.
She held a folded note in her hand like it might burn her. I read the first line. Then I stopped reading because I already knew the way you know a stair is missing before your foot finds the air. I'm sorry, Ada. It's Renee. It happened slowly and then it didn't. Renee was my sister. 2 years younger. Always the one who laughed loudest at family dinners. Always the one my mother described as the fun one, in a tone that quietly filed me under something else. I did not cry in that room. I want to be honest about that, because so much of what people expect from a story like mine is a scream, a shattering, a slap across a face in a church hallway. What I actually felt was very quiet, like a machine somewhere inside my chest had simply been switched off. I walked out the side door in my wedding dress, and I did not look at the guests. I looked at the parking lot, at the ordinary gray asphalt, at a world that was going to keep functioning whether or not I understood what had just happened to it. I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel 2 towns over, still in the dress, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on the lights. At some point, I opened my laptop, not to do anything, just to have something to look at that wasn't my own reflection in the dark window. There was an email waiting, sent that morning before any of this happened. A recruiter. A structural review for a boutique hotel renovation, a project led by a name I recognized only vaguely, Julian Reyes, a young investor who'd bought up half-forgotten buildings in the old textile district and was quietly turning them into something the city hadn't seen in decades. I almost didn't answer it. Then I thought about the note, folded so carefully, as if care could soften betrayal, and I wrote back 4 words. I'm available immediately. Adaline. I didn't know it yet, but I had just stepped off one life and onto the first stone of another. I want to go back, because betrayal like this is never really one afternoon. It's a slow accumulation, like sediment, and you don't see the shape of the riverbed until the water's gone. My father used to keep 2 photo albums. One for family events, birthdays, holidays, the ordinary architecture of a childhood. The other, thinner, was labeled Renee's wins in his handwriting. Dance recitals. A regional spelling bee. Later, her acceptance into a marketing program neither of my parents had actually wanted to pay for but somehow found the money for anyway. There was no album for me. There didn't need to be, my mother said once, half joking, the way people say true things while pretending they're jokes. You've always been able to take care of yourself, Ada. I told myself that was a compliment for years. I built a career out of being able to take care of myself. I got a degree in structural engineering because I liked that buildings didn't lie to you. A load either holds or it doesn't, a beam either bends with intolerance or it fails, and nothing about physics cared whether you were the fun one or the capable one. I liked things that didn't require charm to be true. Marcus came into my life during a season when I was tired of being only capable. He noticed things. He asked what I thought about a bridge redesign I was working on, and then actually listened to the answer. For 2 years, I let myself believe that noticing was the same as loving. Renee liked him too, in the loud, easy way she liked most things that were mine, my apartment when I first got it, my winter coat, my birthday cake flavor, always with a laugh that made it sound like an accident of good taste rather than a habit. I found out much later, weeks after the wedding that wasn't, that it had started at my own engagement dinner. A hand on a forearm that lingered 1 second too long. A private joke exchanged over my head while I was refilling water glasses. I hadn't seen it, because I wasn't looking for it. You don't inspect the foundation of a house you already live in. My mother's first words to me, the day after, were not "I'm sorry." They were, "Please don't make this harder on the family than it has to be." I understood then that I had never been the daughter she worried about losing. I had been the daughter she assumed would hold. Julian Reyes's office was on the fourth floor of a building he hadn't yet finished renovating, which struck me as honest in a way I appreciated. Exposed brick, a temporary folding table, blueprints held down at the corners with coffee mugs. He was younger than I expected, dressed like someone who had learned expensive taste but hadn't yet learned to enjoy performing it. He didn't ask about my personal life. He asked about load paths and seismic retrofitting, and whether I thought the old cast-iron columns in Building 7 could be preserved or whether they'd need full replacement. I answered with more precision than I'd used in months, grateful for a conversation that required nothing of me but competence. "You're overqualified for this role," he said, halfway through, not unkindly. "Why here?" I could have deflected. Instead, I told him the truth, stripped of its wound. "I need work that doesn't ask me who I am, just what I know." He studied me for a moment, not the way men had studied me before, appraising, but the way you'd study a beam you were deciding whether to trust with real weight. "I can give you that," he said.
"For now.
Eventually I'll probably ask who you are anyway. I'm nosy like that." I took the job. I didn't take it because he was, as my mother would later breathlessly describe him after seeing his name in a business magazine, a billionaire. I didn't even know that yet. I took it because for the first time in months, someone had asked me a question I knew how to answer. The weeks that followed were the first quiet I'd had in years. I threw myself into the renovation, into steel and mortar and the patient logic of old buildings that had survived a century of misuse and simply needed someone to take them seriously again. There is a kind of healing in that work that I don't think I could explain to anyone who hasn't felt a structure come back to life under their hands. Julian and I spoke most days. Not about Marcus.
Not about Renee.
About cantilevers, about a courtyard he wanted to save, about a mural someone had painted over decades ago that we found beneath 3 layers of drywall. He never asked about the wedding, though I suspected, given how small the city's business circles were, that he already knew. He simply let me be someone new in front of him, which was its own kind of gift. It was Renee who reached out first for months later. A text, casual, as though nothing had cracked open between us. "Heard you're working on the old Kessler building. Small world." I didn't answer for 3 days. When I did, it was one line. "What do you need, Renee?" She called instead of texting back, which told me everything before she said a word. Renee only called when writing something down felt too permanent. "Mom's worried about you," she said, which was a sentence engineered to make me feel guilty for a worry that had never once been extended toward me first. And honestly, Ada, it would help everyone if we could just move past this. For the holidays. For Dad. I asked her, very calmly, whether she'd told our parents it had started before the wedding, at my own engagement dinner, in my own home. The silence on the line was long enough that I had my answer. "It's complicated," she finally said. "It isn't," I told her. "It's actually the simplest thing that's ever happened to me." She tried a different approach a week later. A message from Marcus this time, forwarded through my mother because he apparently didn't have the nerve to write directly. He wanted to clear the air. He wanted me to know it wasn't planned. He wanted, I understood eventually, absolution that cost him nothing, delivered by a version of me who would smile through gritted teeth for the sake of family photographs. I didn't reply to any of it. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that because for a while I worried that my silence made me cold. But I had learned something in the months of quiet, patient work at the Kessler building. Some structures aren't worth reinforcing. Some things you let go. Not with anger, but with the plain understanding that repair isn't always the wisest use of your hands. What I did instead was write. Long entries, most nights, in a notebook Julian had given me as a joke gift for documenting all the things you refused to say out loud. I wrote down every small erasure I'd absorbed as normal. The missing photo album. My mother's compliments that weren't. The engagement dinner I would now always understand differently. Writing it down didn't feel like revenge. It felt like finally being witnessed, even if the only witness was myself. The magazine profile ran in the spring, a feature on Julian's renovation projects, with a photograph of me standing in the half-restored courtyard of the Kessler building, hard hat under one arm, mid-sentence about tensile strength.
"It wasn't about me."
It was 3 sentences, a caption really, Lead structural engineer Adaline Voss, whose exacting eye has preserved several of the building's original architectural details. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't need to. My mother found it herself, the way people always find the things they've spent months not asking about directly. She called, breathless in a way I recognized from childhood, the voice she used when something impressive had happened to someone she could claim credit for. "Ada, why didn't you tell us you were working with him? Do you know who he is?" I told her I didn't know who he was. I'd known for months. I simply hadn't understood that my worth in her eyes required a name attached to it. The invitation started after that. A birthday dinner I hadn't been invited to in 2 years, suddenly urgent. A cousin's engagement party where my mother mentioned twice within my hearing that I was working closely with Julian Reyes, the developer. Renee sent a message wishing me well, warmer than any she'd sent since the wedding, and I understood with a clarity that didn't even sting any more that her warmth had a source, and the source wasn't remorse. I didn't announce anything to Julian. I didn't need to perform my hurt for him, and by then, he'd become someone I trusted enough not to have to. But one evening, reviewing drawings late in the half-lit courtyard, he asked, without looking up from the blueprints, "Your family's been calling a lot lately."
They found out who you are, I said.
He nodded slowly, unsurprised. And before that, I wasn't worth calling. He didn't offer sympathy, which I was grateful for. He simply said, "Buildings don't care how impressive their neighbors are. They only care whether their foundation holds." Then he went back to the drawings, and I understood it wasn't advice. It was recognition. My mother arranged a family dinner in June, ostensibly for my father's birthday, though the seating chart told a different story. I was placed, deliberately, where I would be easiest to introduce to whichever cousin's spouse happened to work in commercial real estate. Renee sat across from me, practiced and pleasant, Marcus's name never once mentioned, as though 4 months could dissolve a person entirely. I almost didn't go. What made me go, in the end, was an obligation. It was a kind of curiosity. I wanted to see, plainly and without illusion, what my family actually was, now that the fog of expectation had cleared. Halfway through dinner, my mother turned the conversation, gently but unmistakably, toward my work. "Ada's doing incredible things with Julian Reyes's renovation projects," she said to the table, in the voice she used to reserve for Renee's dance recitals. I set down my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It's interesting," I said, "that this is the first dinner in 2 years I've been seated at the good end of the table. I used to think it was because I wasn't interesting enough to sit near. Now I understand it was never about me at all." The table went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something true has been said out loud after years of only being felt. "Ada," my mother started. "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it, which surprised even me. "I just don't think I need to sit at this table to know my own worth anymore. I found that out somewhere else, doing work nobody in this family ever asked me about." I didn't storm out. I finished my meal. I wished my father a happy birthday sincerely because whatever else had happened, he had never once asked me to shrink myself for someone else's comfort. Then I left, calmly, into a warm June evening, and I didn't look back at the house the way I once might have, with longing, or grief, or the old ache of wanting to belong somewhere that had already decided my shape for me. Julian offered me a partnership stake in the Kessler restoration that autumn, not out of charity, he was careful to make clear, but because the preservation of the cast-iron columns, my design, had saved the project nearly 2 years of otherwise necessary demolition. It was, in the driest possible terms, good business. I liked that it was good business. I had spent a lifetime being loved conditionally by people who called it unconditional. I found something almost restful in a partnership that simply called itself what it was. I didn't fall into a romance with him, though I know that's the shape this story is supposed to take. The wounded woman, the billionaire, the swelling music. What actually happened was quieter and, I think, more valuable. He became the first person in years who saw my competence and didn't try to convert it into something he could put a ring on or a family photo around. We built something together that had nothing to do with rescue. He didn't rescue me. I rescued the building, and in doing that I found my own footing again. My mother called twice more that winter. I answered once, briefly, and told her I loved her, which was true, but that I would not be attending gatherings designed to place me next to strangers for the family's benefit. Renee sent one final message, longer than the others, something between an apology and a justification, ending with the line, "I hope you can forgive me eventually." I didn't reply right away. When I did, weeks later, it was short. "I don't think forgiveness is something I owe on a deadline. When I feel it, you'll know. Until then, I wish you well from a distance." It wasn't cruelty. It was the truest thing I had left to give her. A year after the wedding that didn't happen, I stood again in a room with tall windows, though this one had no pews, no folded note waiting behind the door. It was the finished courtyard of the Kessler building, glass roof replacing what had once been open sky, light falling in pieces across restored brick the way it had once fallen across a white dress I never wore again. Julian found me there during the opening reception, both of us slightly removed from the crowd, the way we always ended up at these things. "Regret any of it?" he asked, meaning the year, meaning all of it. I thought about the church parking lot, the quiet machine switching off in my chest, the folded note, the dinner table gone silent around a truth I'd finally said out loud. "No," I said, and found I meant it completely. "I think I finally built something that holds." He didn't ask me to explain what I meant. He understood buildings, and by then he understood me. I don't know what will happen with my family. Some bridges, once their load-bearing capacity is compromised, can be repaired with patience and honesty. Others simply become part of the landscape you learn to walk around. I've stopped needing to know which kind mine will be. What I know is this: I spent years believing my worth needed someone else's name attached to be real. I know better now. The light moved across the brick as the evening went on, blue, then gold, then blue again, the same light from that hallway a year before. But I was not the same woman standing beneath it. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt less like loss and more like arrival. Some betrayals don't end in shouting. They end in silence, in the quiet moment you finally choose yourself. Adaline never got revenge in the way the world expects. She got something better, her own name, standing on its own, needing no one else's to matter. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more stories about women who chose themselves. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from people who only valued you for what you could get them? Let's talk about it. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.